let's go to teacher literacy and numeracy standards and Landtite scores. The Landtite literacy and numeracy scores test for teachers shows first-time test candidates who have met the standard have dropped from around 95.2% in 2016 to 91.8% in 2020, and similarly for numeracy. That's in literacy and similarly for numeracy. How concerned are you that after 12 years of curriculum management, almost 10% of recently qualified teachers cannot meet Year 9 NAPLAN standards, which is the standard of Landtite?
Thank you, Senator. Obviously, it's very important that Australian teachers be able to meet minimum literacy and numeracy standards, and that is the purpose of the Landtite. And we do have, through NAPLAN, a very important and effective tool in gauging how students are progressing in terms of their literacy and numeracy achievement. Clearly, we would like all students to be able to meet the minimum literacy and numeracy standards, and certainly we would like all applicants who are applying to enter initial teacher education courses and graduating, I should say, graduating from those courses, to be able to teach literacy and numeracy effectively. The method by which those achievements, those standards are achieved is up to schools and jurisdictions to implement the most effective teaching policies and teaching approaches that they can to give students the best chance to achieve those standards.
Senator, perhaps I could add to that. Alex Gordon, Deputy Secretary of Schools and Youth in the Department. The actual responsibility for the Landtite test actually sits with the Australian Government. We commission the administration of that test, so doesn't sit with Acara, the responsibility for that, and it's part of the administration of initial teacher education accreditation standards that are agreed with states and territory ministers. So those accreditation standards actually, the responsibility for those sits with AITSL, the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership, and they'll actually be appearing after Acara. So if you've got further questions about the quality of initial teacher education graduates, they're probably best directed to AITSL.
Well, with due respect, Ms Gordon, we've had 12 years of Acara now, and what we're seeing in the teachers' examinations, which is what Landtite does, the assessment of teachers, is the product of the national curriculum over the last 12 years, because 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, we've seen a steady decline, and actually a fall, and then a steady gradual decline, and same with numeracy in the same years. These teachers have come out of the national curriculum. That's the point.
Sorry, Senator, the teachers are the education programs within the universities and the higher education providers are responsible for the education programs, the initial teacher education programs that educate those teachers. So when they graduate, they're not, they're prepared to teach the Australian curriculum, but essentially the program that prepares them to be teachers is the accreditation standards for those programs is set by AITSL.
So what you're saying is the universities have lowered their standards, but what about the students who've gone into the universities? This is a test, basically NAPLAN Year 9 level, and 10% are failing that.
The test is based on is set to determine students that are in the top 30% of the Australian population in terms of their literacy and numeracy ability, and that's the test has been designed to do that. It's not the same as NAPLAN. It's a different test.
I understand that.
That's correct.
And NAPLAN Year 9.
And the test has been designed to help identify people that are in those courses that have the capabilities to become good teachers. So that's part of our quality assurance process to ensure that those teachers that are graduating from those programs meet that requirement. So that test is now a requirement to be able to teach. It's a requirement for graduation, from an initial teacher education course to do exactly what you're suggesting, which is to improve the quality of the graduates that are coming out of teaching degrees.
What we're seeing is a decline.
In terms of the outcomes of that test, the test has to be completed. So graduates coming out of initial teacher education courses must pass that test as before they can graduate those initial teacher education degrees. The initial results were quite high when it was optional. So the course, the outcomes, and I don't have the actual results in front of me, but the important point to make though is that teachers that are graduating teacher education courses and progressing to the classrooms will have met that test. So if they don't meet that test, they're not able to graduate and become a teacher.
No, I understand that. You've made that clear. What I'm saying is that the results have fallen. And that's from students who have entered after 12 years of national curriculum. So let's move on. We've also got an article here, out-of-field teaching is out of control in Australian schools. And I've also got the numbers here. 21% of mathematics teachers are from outside the field of mathematics. 40% of geography teachers are outside the field of geography. 15% of English teachers are from outside of English. 21% of teachers in years 7 to 10 are out of the field. How does Acara curriculum support these teachers to deliver excellent learning outcomes when they are either feeling unqualified or are unqualified?
So, Senator, again, that's probably not a question for Acara, because Acara is responsible for the development of the curriculum and the assessment and reporting process, whereas AITSL might be able to provide you more information about what education authorities are doing. So AITSL provide a lot of support for teachers, but it's the education authorities that employ teachers and are responsible for their ongoing professional development and training to ensure that they have the appropriate skills to teach the subjects that they're responsible for.
Thank you. After 12 years of oversight on the national curriculum, what metrics are used to determine whether the national curriculum approach is working?
So, Senator, the metrics that we use do not cover the entire all learning areas of the Australian curriculum. As you may be aware, the metrics that we do have in relation to literacy and numeracy NAPLAN, and we can go into exactly what that does. The main metrics, which are not the responsibility of Acara, around the overall success of school education, arguably are the senior secondary certificates, which are run in each state and territory by the jurisdictional test administration authorities. But what Acara is responsible for and can comment on is the metrics in relation to literacy and numeracy through NAPLAN.
What about PISA?
PISA is an international assessment and part of the overall national assessment program, that's true. And what we can see through the PISA results, although it does measure a slightly different construct, does show that in relation to those domains that PISA does assess, it has shown a decline in the achievement of Australian students on PISA.
Yeah, and that's pretty disturbing because in reading, you're familiar, so I don't need to show you, but especially in science, we've really plummeted. All of them, reading, mathematics and science, we've declined, as you said. In science, we're really plummeting now. So this is our future productive capacity we're educating here, and yet we're seeing a decline in it. We've now gone below the OECD in mathematics. The OECD is not exactly, the Western countries are not exactly beacons for education these days. They've all been diluted.
You have a question, Senator?
Yes, just continuing on from that. Acara have been responsible for the curriculum for 12 years, which means that a whole generation of children have moved through their schooling. In that time, standards have fallen, as you just confirmed. Government projections show that 90% of employment growth in the next 4 years will require education beyond school. Young people must be prepared for an economy requiring higher levels of skill than ever before. And importantly, kids of today will need the ability to think for themselves and to take the initiative, because they're going to have to jump into new fields frequently in their working lives. I understand that Maria Montessori said that the critical years for the formation of both character and intellect are 0 to 6, birth to 6. Nonetheless, the primary years are very important. So how confident is Acara that another generation of children will not finish their schooling with even lower standards in reading, mathematics and science? How are you going to stop this downward trend?
So a core part of this is the review that's underway at the moment, Senator. We are looking particularly at our mathematics and science curricula to embed more explicitly exactly those kinds of capabilities that you were talking about in terms of critical thinking, the ability to apply mathematical concepts and knowledge to real-world problem solving. This is a key aspect of the proposed changes to the Australian curriculum, and if these changes are agreed, and of course we're in a consultation phase at the moment and we're receiving lots of feedback on the proposed changes, and we'll be listening carefully to the advice that we get from teachers through that process. The hope is that we will have a curriculum that is better than the one that we've got at the moment in terms of being able to develop students' capabilities in precisely the kinds of areas that you've referred to.
Thank you. I know it's not your sole responsibility. It's the responsibility of people who are elected to represent the citizens of Australia, because it's not just school that matters. It's, as I said, Maria Montessori said, the years 0 to 6, which is largely under the parents' control. But it's things like taxation systems, energy prices, things that affect our society, cause both parents to work when one could possibly stay home. The next PISA reporting period ends in 2021. Are you expecting our 15-year-olds to fall further down the international ranking? If not, why not?
I have no grounds for speculating on what those results will show, Senator.
So
I think that the best thing to do would be to wait and see what the results show, and make judgment on facts rather than what we might speculate might be the case at this point in time.
So I've just alluded to the holistic nature of what drives children's development. So this question: who or what should take responsibility for the comprehensive failure of the education system in those declining scores? Is it Acara? Is it the students? Is it the parents? Is it the teachers? Is it the teachers' unions? Is it politicians? Is it voters who select the politicians? Is it politicians who select the oversight bodies? Or is it a comprehensive, everyone's not doing our job?
Well, I think you may have answered your own question, Senator. There are multiple factors that go into the outcomes, the educational outcomes that are delivered by an overarching system. There are many players involved. What we at Acara are doing is focusing on ensuring that we can develop a curriculum, which is one input into the whole process, that gives students the best chance of success.
Senator, perhaps I could add to that, because while Acara developed the curriculum and oversee the National Assessment Program and reporting, it's actually the education authorities that determine how that curriculum will be implemented within their schools and support the ongoing development of their teachers and help prepare them to teach in their classrooms. So it is very much a collective responsibility, but states and territories obviously run government schools. The non-government sector is responsible for the operation of non-government schools. The Commonwealth provide a contribution in terms of funding as well, and as part of that we work with states and territories on a reform program to try and improve the standards across Australia and trying to lift the very outcomes that you're talking about.
So it's an opinion, so the chair might pull me up, but would you care to offer, you jumped in there, an opinion as to where we need to work in this country to restore our productive capacity for the future? Is it teachers? Is it politicians who oversee the bureaucrats, who oversee the teachers, who develop the children? Is it the parents?
Senator, I can't give you an opinion, but what I can say is that there is a program of reform that is underway to help address the decline in results, and there is a lot of work underway. So the Australian Government has an agreement with states and territories, the National School Reform Agreement, and under that we're progressing a number of reforms. States and territories also have bilateral agreements with us that outline a number of reforms to help lift performance. So there is a collective commitment to work towards turning around those declines, but there's no silver bullet in this space. It requires concerted effort across the board.
Thank you. And I think
how long do you have? I would like to throw to Senator.
Probably another 5 minutes, Chair.
We'll meet halfway. A couple more minutes, and then I'll go to Senator Faruqi and then to Labor. So.
At the risk of slowing down Senator Roberts, I beg your pardon, it's worth adding that Minister Tudge has indicated he too is very concerned about Australia's decline in PISA scores in recent years, and he has publicly indicated that this government's made a commitment to returning Australia to the top group of nations by 2030, and part of the strategy for doing that is for more support for land-type testing for teachers, and that was funded in the budget because it is something that we see as very important to improving standards.
Yeah, the way I see it, Minister, is that we have a role in governance. You're in government. We have a role in the governance. And governance, in my experience as a director and as an executive, involves trusteeship, which is looking after the values of the organisation, Australia, governorship, which is looking after the future organisation, the future of our country, and stewardship, management of and use of resources. What I'm seeing here is a national security issue, because our most important productive capacity is being diminished. And we need to, I think, approach this holistically, because it's the kids of today and the education they receive, both at home and at school, that will determine how our future productive capacity is guided. And that's fundamental to the future of our country. So,
Roberts, I quite agree, and I think you're right to identify that there's matters that are relevant to the education portfolio that feed into that, but there's also greater social issues. Correct. And matters like the role of parents, for instance, all play an important part in making sure we get the right outcome here.
Right. I'm encouraged with the conversation I had with Minister Tudge, but it's more than Minister Tudge.
Yeah.
So the children the recent comprehensive review of the national curriculum has received a mixed response. There's an overwhelming evidence that shows children are very powerful learners at a young age. Maria Montessori identified 0 to 6, and yet the reviewed curriculum appears to delay the introduction of some fundamentals. Children in prep, 4 years of age, have already started learning timetables when they count by 2s, 5s and so on. How does delaying the learning timetables until year 4, how is that going to lift year 4? How's it going to lift Australia's performance in mathematics?
Well, Senator, I'll hand to Ms Davey shortly, but can I say at the outset just to remind you that we haven't got a final curriculum yet. We are in the process of revising the curriculum. What we've done, as I indicated in my opening remarks, is this is the first time that the full set of curriculum materials for the proposed curriculum has been on show, if you like, to the whole of the Australian public. It wasn't done when the Australian curriculum was first established, and it wasn't done in the 2014 review. So we are encouraging and we welcome the range of feedback. And we have received a lot of feedback on this particular issue, and we will be looking carefully at all the advice that we receive through it. But I'll leave it at that and just ask if Ms Davey has any further comment to make.
Janet Davey, Director of Curriculum, Acara. Senator, we haven't changed the expectations of the capacity of students to learn to multiply. The current Australian curriculum and the proposed revisions to the Australian curriculum still start teaching students about multiplication from foundation year, that first year. And teachers are still expected to teach around the multiplication facts of 2, 3, 5 and 10 in year 3 and up to year 4. If teachers decide to use a teaching strategy like multiplication times tables, that's up to them to do that. We don't specify using timetables in the curriculum now or in the proposed curriculum. But the expectation that teachers still have to teach those multiplication facts is still in the Australian curriculum and in the proposed revisions to the Australian curriculum.
Thank you.
It's always been there, hasn't it, Ms Davey?
It has.
Yes, despite reports to the country.
Anzac Day is about history, documented and verifiable, and not about how people believe the world was created. Why is Anzac Day treated only as a commemoration when it is in fact a defining aspect of our history and us as a nation?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean, Senator. Would you perhaps just unpack that question a little bit further?
Sure. The Acara, Australian Curriculum Assessment and Reporting Authority, I don't know the structure of the document, but
right.
It's under Geography, Achievement Standard, and Knowledge and Understanding of History. And it discusses religious festivals, Easter, Ramadan, Buddha's birthday, Feast of Passover, Coming of the Light, family reunions, cultural festivals, and community commemorations such as NAIDOC Week and Anzac Day. I put it to you that Anzac Day is more than a commemoration. It's actually an acknowledgement of one of the births of our country. It's highly significant in the development of our country.
Yes, Senator, and we are anticipating a lot of community feedback on a range of issues related to the draft proposals in the curriculum. There are a range of matters in the draft curriculum, particularly in civics and citizenship and history, which are of great many interest to many people. What we can say is that the overarching rationale for the civics and citizenship curriculum does make it very clear that the purpose of the civics and citizenship curriculum is to engender an understanding and a valuing of those aspects of Australia's history that have gone into developing Australia as a free and fair democracy. We have a good, close look at all the democratic procedures and processes that we put in place. There is acknowledgement to the Westminster system. There is acknowledgement of our Christian heritage and its contribution to those liberal democratic values. These are all the things that have contributed to the building up of Australia being the successful nation that it is. And in that context, the celebration and commemoration of Anzac Day or other days which are important not only to individual communities but to the national community are highlighted in the curriculum. I'll just ask if Ms Davey has any further observations she may wish to make.
Only just to add that I think, Senator, you're referring to a couple of particular statements that are about commemorations, but there's other aspects of the history curriculum. For example, it's mandatory to teach about World War I and World War II, and there'll be components of that where students will teach, where students will get into the detail of things such as Anzac Day. So. I think you need to. We could identify you a lot more statements that strengthen not just the commemoration aspect of Anzac Day.
Last question.
Last question, please.
Okay, it's about culture. How does the Australian curriculum safeguard our cultural values and way of life if it ignores mandating teaching history to our children? Now, is that correct? That it mandates? Okay, and so let me just go on then. How does the curriculum help children of migrant families to integrate into our way of life, which is clearly the attraction of migration to Australia? How do we maintain our country's values, which is what attracted people to come here? Because we're seeing a dilution of it.
So, as I was saying, Senator, in relation to the civics and citizenship curriculum, there's a very strong emphasis on those values in terms of the liberal democratic values, including values of freedom, equality and the rule of law. These are set out very clearly in the rationale statement for civics and citizenship. We haven't, despite some media reports, removed reference to freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. What we've done there is move those from Year 8 to Year 7 so that students are introduced to them even earlier than they are now. And of course, history is a very important part of the Australian curriculum, and there are plenty of opportunities through the teaching of the history curriculum for students to come to understand why it is we have such an effective federal democracy. For example, there is a very extensive section on the history of federation, which brought together the colonies into a national community. And it does highlight, important national figures such as Henry Parkes, Alfred Deakin, and others, Samuel Griffiths, people who played an important role in our history, including, significant women who have made Australia one of the earliest adopters of women's suffrage. So there are plenty of opportunities in the teaching of Australian history for migrants or even, native-born Australians to come to understand how their history has evolved and has contributed to the creation of the country that we have today.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr.
excellent.
Cavallo.
Sorry,
Thank you,
Senator
Chair.
Roberts.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator.